The subquery becomes even more dynamic when it's returning a list. And by list, I mean multiple rows, one or many rows, or possibly even 0 rows, I guess. But the key thing is only a single column. So let me open this up and let's see some code. The operator here is where in, and in lesson 1 we talked about using the in, but we had to hard code a list of values in there. If a subquery returns the list, it becomes dynamic. Actually becomes pretty cool. Let's look at a couple examples of this. In the first example, the simple subquery returns the Basecamp ID for where the region is equal to North Carolina, and there are in fact 2 base camps in North Carolina, so that ends up becoming a list. So the outer query will execute as if there's a 1, 2 right here, and if Basecamp ID is in 1 or 2, there we go. And let me Control Z to undo my edit. Switching over to the OBX Kites database, here's a use of this in reverse. So even though it's nonsensical to order by product ID, for demonstration purposes this makes a nice simple not-in type of query. So the subquery will execute and return a list of products. Then the outer query comes through and it finds every product ID where that product ID is not in the subquery. This can be pretty powerful, but there's a warning here as well. Think about the work SQL Server would have to do to prove any item is not in a list. It's just like looking through a telephone book and saying, find me everybody whose telephone number is not equal to this. The only way to logically prove that would be to go through and scan every row. And that's what the not in would cause. It causes table scans. The place to avoid the not in is not necessarily here in the query, but in the schema design in the first place, which is why it's so important that the schema design is designed for query path.